All right. Well, we are going to move now to our presentation. And Barb, do you want to introduce Dave? He did a little bit earlier, but do you want to what's it called?
Sure, I can. Okay, David, this is totally unpracticed, as you know. However, I've been working with David for a few months now. David came to our district through a contact down in the Sonoma Valley Rotary Club who mentioned that there was a project going on in the Navajo about water. And at the time, I really knew very, very little about it. So we started to talk back and forth with David from Sedona. And over the past few months, we've really established, I think, a great friendship. He is a wonderful guy, and I have watched him deliver the presentation you're about to see. We've done this presentation probably 6 or 7 times in our district. And every time I listen to David give this presentation, first of all, I learn something new. Second of all, I am just completely impressed with him as a Rotarian. And he makes me feel like this is what Rotary is about. It's people like David getting out there, getting involved in really important work and giving the rest of us the opportunity to learn about it and see it. So he's just a fantastic guy, and I think you're really going to enjoy this presentation. So pretty informal, David, but go for it.
Well, Barb, thank you so much. That was such a kind and overly kind introduction. And President Maggie, thank you very much for making some time for me today to talk about this project. I'm going to try to share my screen here. Let's see if I can get this so it'll work just right. Yeah, perfect. And Dustin, I just want to tell you, I'm sorry I'm not going to make the highway cleanup, but I hope you have a happy birthday anyway. But yes, Barb, and again, you've been such a great advocate, such a great friend through this entire process. And what we're really trying to do as much as possible is to spread the word and make people aware of water poverty issues that exist right here in our own country. And so I'm going to go through this, and Barb, I'm going to surprise you mid-presentation and ask you for some comments from your background in public health as well. But this is what I plan to talk about today. First of all, I want to talk about and make you aware of the Navajo Nation and the kind of the extent, the population there, the water poverty issues that exist there. Then I'm going to talk about the Dig Deep organization, which is an organization that has taken on this challenge and has been addressing it. Then I'm going to talk about what we've been doing in Rotary to try to address these issues and the current project that we're working on. So let me tell you a little bit about the Navajo Nation. It's an area about the size of West Virginia that is located in the Four Corners area of the Southwest. And that you can see that on the map there, where it's right where New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and Colorado meet. The Navajo Nation was established starting in 1868. You can see that right in the middle of the Navajo Nation, there's a donut hole there. That's the Hopi Nation. And while we work with the Navajo on their water issues, the Hopi have very similar issues. We've just had a relationship with the Navajo that has allowed us to make progress there, and we'll tell you a little bit about that. But that area, there's about 175,000 people. It's about the size of West Virginia, with 1/11 of the population of West Virginia. So it's very sparsely populated. And if you've ever driven through this area, you'll see that the homes are scattered around. And we'll talk about why that is, because there's a very specific reason for that. There's about, of that 175,000 people, there are about 70,000 people, about 40% of the Navajo, live without clean running water in their home. And while that shocks most people, I'm embarrassed to say that I didn't know this until 4 years ago. And I live within 2 hours of the Navajo Nation. And I didn't know that there was this kind of water poverty in the United States, much less right here in my own district. 44% of the children on the Navajo Nation live in poverty based upon the last census, and there is nearly a 50% unemployment rate. And that was a figure that was calculated before they lost their two largest employers, a coal mine that closed and an electric plant that was powered by that coal also closed. And so unemployment is just a terrible issue on the Navajo Nation as well. But these are some interesting statistics with regard to water poverty and kind of give you some comparison, some perspective on water poverty on the Navajo Nation. The average American family uses 100 gallons of water per day. And what's interesting to keep in mind is that is single-use water. Once we use water typically for one purpose, it is discarded. The Navajo, on the other hand, live on a family of whatever the family size is. The average Navajo family lives on 7 gallons of water per day. So that's about 1/14 of what the average American family uses. Or if you think of what we use typically in one day, they have to make last for 2 weeks. And some interesting aspects to that. Number one is not turning on the spigots and they only have 7 gallons come out of the spigots each day. They have to go to town. They might drive 10, 20, 30 miles to gather water to last as long as they possibly can, bring it back in barrels, cans, buckets, anything they can put together, keep it outside their home, cover it to protect it from animals who might otherwise use their water source, and then bring it in the house periodically, and then use it multiple times before it is discarded. They may cook with it, and then use that water a second time to clean with, and then ultimately use it in their toilet, if they have an indoor toilet, to use to flush their toilet. So even that 7 gallons is being recycled multiple times in less and less critical usages so that they can make the best use of the water. It's such a precious, precious resource. So let me tell you a little bit about why the water poverty issues are so difficult on the Navajo Nation. The United Nations typically will, what they do is they go around the world and they look at water issues and water poverty issues, and they examine how you can provide water and solve water poverty issues. And the United Nations has determined that in terrain and the geology of areas like the Navajo Nation, these arid areas with the challenge that they have that we're going to talk about, you can't have a traditional hub and spoke system where you drill a well and then pipe it out to critical locations to make it accessible, whether it's to the school or the hospital, a community center, or to a neighborhood so that people can access the water. That's not possible on the Navajo Nation, and we're going to describe why. Instead, what they have to have is a cistern system. And we're going to describe about how that is part of the solution with regard to providing water to the Navajo. Here are some of the challenges that the Navajo face in the Southwest. The first is caliche. Caliche is an almost impenetrable calcium carbonate rock. It covers the Southwest. It's present here in Sedona. It's present at the Grand Canyon. As a matter of fact, I had an official visit last year at the Grand Canyon Club, and they were all looking at me real funny when I was describing these cistern systems. They have to be an underground tank at the home, and they were looking at me funny, and because I was describing the problem on the Navajo Nation, and I said, why are the funny looks? I don't understand. And they said, that's what we do. We have the same caliche problem that they do. We have to have our water delivered to us. So that's one of the challenges, is the caliche. That prevents a hub and spoke system from piping the water out to the accessible locations. Next problem is sacred lands. These are the original sacred lands of the Navajo. The Navajo were repatriated from Oklahoma back to these lands when they signed a peace treaty with the United States. And the United States agreed to return them here. Well, they have sacred lands, and so it is not allowed to pipe, even if you could, across those lands. And there's canyons and arroyos. There's just challenges with regard to the geography here. Finally, there's the water, the weather issues. They have very harsh winters in this area. They live at between 6,000 and 10,000 feet. And so they have very harsh winters, which mean that you can't pipe water above ground. And the summers are so hot as well that you end up with a bacteria problem in the piping if they were above ground. So everything has to be underground. Again, you can't do that on the Navajo Nation. They also live in a matriarchal clan-based society, which means that when a Navajo man and a Navajo woman marry, they will live on the wife's mother's clan land. And when they go to find a place to live on the clan's land, there's what they call a grazing manager. Most of the Navajo maintain their own livestock to provide milk and meat for the family. And the grazing manager is responsible for making sure that the livestock of those who live in the clan land do not compete with one another. I was told by the leaders of the Navajo chapter where we're going to talk about in Dilcon that each head of cattle requires 50 acres. It's such an arid land. That's the only way they can have those cattle survive, is to have 50 acres for themselves. So that's why the Navajo start to really disperse and live out away from one another. You might have them living out by a beautiful formation over here and out here by an arroyo or a canyon. And that's why they live separated, is so that their cattle and their livestock have the opportunity to graze. The final problem is really a tragic one, and that is in the 50s and 60s, the United States government that holds the land that the Navajo live on in trust for the Navajo, the United States government discovered that there was uranium on Navajo lands. And you'll see the map here with all those red dots. Those are locations where there was uranium mining or a uranium waste site that was left after the uranium mining was done. And what's happened, unfortunately, with that uranium mining is that has polluted the most accessible source of water, which you'd find at about 500 feet, give or take 100 feet underground. So if you drilled a well, got that deep, you would find water, but it's so polluted, it can't be used for human consumption. Now, by the way, the Navajo, because they're so desperate for water, will typically allow their animals to use that water. A lot of those wells existed from back in the 50s and 60s, again, so polluted that the Navajo are not supposed to use them. But they need to provide water to their animals. And it's suspected that the high incidence of cancer on the Navajo Nation is a result of the pollution and what the animals are eating, are drinking, and then they're drinking the milk and eating the meat from those animals. So on the Navajo Nation, since that is not potable water for human consumption, they have to keep drilling down, and you'll hit water again, typically at about 1,000 to 1,500 feet. The last well, just to show you what a problem it is with regard to the caliche and the challenges of drilling, the last well they drilled on the Navajo Nation cost $1.2 million. And that was just a single point. That's no piping or anything else. That is just a single point to draw water to the surface so that Navajo can go to that source, collect water to take it home. So obviously it is a huge problem. And Barb, this is why you said something yesterday that really touched me with regard to the implications of the pollution with regard to life on the Navajo Nation. I wondered if you'd share some of the context here on the impact of that pollution.
Sure, I can do that quickly for us. So when uranium is mined, when it's mined and processed, the waste products are called tailings. And so for many, many years, there were these tailing sites all throughout the Navajo Nation. So there's a lot of water involved, so they're very wet, and it's created this exposure to uranium for the population that was really significant. And there have also been, and it's never gone away. So those AUMs, or abandoned uranium mines, they're still in place on the surface. And so the consequences for that, for the people who live there, is that they have much higher levels of uranium in their bodies. They have higher frequencies of cancer. And then they have, when you think about that, the cascade effect of that, when you look at what that does to mothers having children, and we all love babies and kids. So when you think about what happens to the kids when they're exposed, basically in utero, to uranium, and what happens to their development. There's a study right now that's being done by the University of New Mexico. It's called the Navajo Birth Cohort Study. And it's a study that is looking at mothers and babies. It started out as the first year of life, and the baby developmental impacts of exposure to uranium for that first year. And they've just extended the study to watch those babies through year 5. And when we think about, that first 5 years of life and the importance for our whole lives of being able to develop cognitively in a good way so we can go to school and we can learn. So all of the repercussions of this negative uranium effect are just rippling through that entire population. So it's when you think about all of the things that are impacted by this lack of water, especially for kids, and we all love kids, you just really, really want to do something about it.
I think that one of the reasons that we work on water in Rotary and as one of our areas of focus is one of those systemic issues that keeps a people from reaching their full potential, for advancing themselves. And so that's why the water is so important. And as Barb is pointing out, the implications of having the polluted water and animals that have been drinking that is just it compounds the issues here. Well, the organization that has that we discovered back in about 2015 is addressing this issue is called Dig Deep. They're out of the Los Angeles area. Very interesting story with regard to the individual who started this. But they were a group that was drilling in Africa. And they discovered through a potential donor that there was actually water poverty in the United States, and they were encouraged to look into it. They did. They found that there are actually 2.2 million people in the United States that live without clean running water in their home. There's some in Appalachia, the Louisiana area, but the largest concentration of people living without clean running water are on the Navajo Nation. The Dig Deep organization happened to have had a Navajo on their staff, a native-speaking Navajo who had grown up in Tuba City. And so she was very familiar. She could speak the language. They connected with the Navajo, explored the problem, and have taken on the issue of trying to bring clean running water to homes on the Navajo Nation. As you'll see on the slide here, they're the sole U.S. nonprofit operating in the United States under WASH protocols of UNICEF and the World Health Organization. So I'm going to jump into exactly how these systems work because they're unique. And this was a little bit hard to convince the Rotary Foundation that this type of water project should be funded. But we have funded 3 with the Rotary Foundation, but they had to change their definition of what a sustainable water project was. The Rotary Foundation typically looks for that hub and spoke system because they see that as sustainable. But as the United Nations has determined, the only way to provide water in the kind of geology and geography and the situation of the Navajo, this arid territory, is to put in cisterns at the home, as I mentioned. So these are home-based systems, and you'll see in the picture there that the 1,200-gallon tank is installed underground at the home to keep it deep enough to keep it away from the cold during the winter and the heat during the summers to keep that water safe and available for the home. They install solar panels as well to run the pump, to pump the water into the home. And one thing that's interesting, if you've ever, again, driven through the Navajo Nation, you realize that there are a lot of manufactured homes. It could be trailers, very frequently old trailers, or manufactured homes that are plumbed and wired, but they've never been hooked to anything. I spoke to a woman through an interpreter up on the Navajo Nation the last time I was up there, a woman who had lived for 4 decades without water or electricity in her home. So, I mean, the challenges are just huge. The solar panels not only power the pump, they typically will provide a little bit of excess electricity, so the children will have some lights to help do their homework. They might have enough for a television so they can stay informed of what's going on. Obviously very important during an outbreak of COVID that they've had on the Navajo Nation as well. The installations cost about $4,500 per home. And what happens is once the installation is complete, water trucks come around and fill those tanks about every 3 to 4 weeks. And what typically happens is the school bus drivers who pick the kids up in the morning and drop them off in the afternoon, in between times, they'll drive water trucks around on a very similar route to fill the water tanks at the home. By the way, the individuals without water have to apply for these systems. We don't just install them at every home as a community water system. There are some of the Navajo, unfortunately, that just do not want anyone to come on their land for reasons that you can imagine over the years, and the feeling of just that they just don't want to have that involvement of outsiders. Financial support is available. The Navajo Nation keeps a reserve so that those tanks don't go dry. There's a lot of unemployment. They do have to pay for the water. The water's more expensive than the water I get in Sedona. And that's because of the delivery system, having to maintain those trucks, having to hire truck drivers, replace the trucks periodically, and so on. So that is all figured into the $4,500 original cost, as well as setting aside the reserve that will provide support should someone not have the resources to pay for the water. And the result, we absolutely transform lives and give them an opportunity to reach their full potential. Just a quick snapshot of what we've been doing in District 5495. We had a couple Rotarians who saw a PBS special on this issue back in 2015 and said, a water project, you know, within driving distance, right here in our own district, we've got to take this to the Rotary Foundation and get this funded. And as I mentioned, the Rotary Foundation really pushed back on that. And it took a lot of persistence going to the United Nations to pull out the research that they had done, draw on the conclusions they had drawn to convince the Rotary Foundation that indeed the only way that Rotary was ever going to be able to help these individuals, these people, to have water is to support the cistern system of delivery of water in the way that Dig Deep is doing it. We have done, as I mentioned, completed three global grants, at least the funding of which. The third global grant was completed last year, 2019. Unfortunately, because of COVID-19, and I should point out, you may have seen some exposés, some documentaries on this issue. The Navajo Nation had the worst per capita outbreak in the world, worse than New York and New Jersey back when they were in the news all the time. The Navajo Nation per capita was even worse than that. The Navajo Nation has gone through 57-hour lockdowns during weekends. They do 8 p.m. curfews. They finally were able to get the incidence of COVID-19 down to almost zero. And suddenly they've had another spike where the daily cases are in the hundreds again on the Navajo Nation. They have reinstituted stay-at-home orders. It's been a real challenge. And for us, with regard to installing these water systems, we've been on pause since March, sitting on funds from the Navajo Nation, from the Rotary Foundation and from clubs and districts right now. We are poised and ready to go back and install as many as we can. We're working in the Dilcon community, which is about, if you know Winslow, Arizona, the song standing on the corner in Winslow, Arizona. We're working about 45 minutes from Winslow in the Dilcon community. And get this, this is a community of about 2,000 total people, and over 300 of the homeowners have applied for these water systems. When you do the math there, you realize that it's almost everyone in the community that needs a water system and access to water. We are in our fourth, as I mentioned, effort to raise funds and raise awareness for clubs and districts of this tragedy right here in our own country. My own club, the Rotary Club of Sedona, is the host club for this particular project. We're raising funds and getting commitments from clubs who are interested in supporting and trying to help us deal with this human tragedy. Here's the information with regard to the global grant and so on. I'd be happy to talk with any of your leaders or committees if they're interested in pursuing this. But the main thing that Barb and I are out trying to do is to raise awareness with regard to this issue, because we typically don't think of there being a water poverty issue in the United States. It just seems almost inconceivable, but it does exist. I know I've only left you a couple minutes, but if you do have questions, I'd be happy to answer them either now or offline if that would be better for the group.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Barb. Yeah, there will be questions, but before we go to that, I wanted to turn it over to Charlie Jordan, who is the co-chair of our World Community Services Committee. She has something to say. Hopefully. Charlie?
Charlie's on mute.
Right, there she comes.
Am I, can you hear me?
Yeah, but you're going to have to speak up.
Okay. So my pleasure to, as representative of our club's World Community Service Committee, is to announce that we have approved $1,500 for this project.
Thank you so much. It means a lot. It really does.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Rotary at work. Great
Yes.
job.
So we'll get that information, you know, that you had on the screen. I would maybe Dave, you can email that to me, and then we'll make sure that we send the money to the right place. And I have to say that the World Community Services Committee is giving that money, but that was money that this club raised with all of our new antics this year, our new new fundraisers and just creativity. And so everybody here is a piece of that. And I'm just really, really pleased that we were able to do this today. So it is 8 o'clock. Because of the nature of this, people can stay on and chat more. I'm not going to turn the meeting off. I'd love to have anybody ask you questions if they have them, but I want to at least formally end the meeting. But before I do that, I want to thank you both officially, and we will be making donations in your name to a local group called Tri-County Independent Living that works with people with disabilities and advocates for them, works to help them in the community. And so we're going to do that in both of your names, and we really appreciate you being here today and everyone else for being here today.